Right, we've got the same scene here, but 3 different times of the year. Here we've got a spring scene, we've got a summer scene, and we've got an autumn scene. And I'll very quickly just go through the colours that I've used in each. In this one we've used phthalo blue mixed with white for the sky. We've added a little touch of permanent rose, just a tiny touch, just to grey and purple out some of those clouds. For the greens, by and large, we've used a lemon yellow mixed with the phthalo blue, but because that makes almost a fluorescent green, we've added a little touch of raw umber or occasionally a touch of the permanent rose, just to tone it down slightly. I've also put on some white with a tiny touch of raw umber. It's still primarily white, but it gives a nice light effect to the scene with the sun shining from the top right, as it is in all of these pictures, onto the church. And it looks quite a bright, warm picture until you get to the summer scene. Now you can see it's much warmer. We've used ultramarine blue and warmed that up with a touch of permanent rose to give a much more purpley blue. You can see the difference between the two there. For the greens, in the distance, we've primarily used cadmium yellow with a touch of ultramarine blue and lightened off with either a little touch of white or a little more yellow, or darkened off by adding raw umber to the mix. For the church, I've used a mix mostly of titanium white and yellow ochre, and that's given a lovely warm mellow glow to the front of the church. Have a look at the difference between the two and you can see exactly what I mean. And for the foreground, I've just used 1 or 2 streaks of yellow ochre mixed in with the cadmium yellow, just to warm things up a little bit more, and similarly in 1 or 2 areas in the trees. Now if we move on to this autumn scene or fall scene, you can see that I've used phthalo blue in the sky mixed this time with a touch of raw umber just to grey it down, obviously plenty of white. But to give that heavy atmosphere, even though it's still sunny, I've added more white, the same mix, more white for the clouds, and I've just added a little touch of cadmium red, you can see here and there, and a touch of yellow ochre. That gives a little bit of colour, a little bit of interest to the clouds. They're not just a flat white cloud. And in the same way, for the sunny side of the church, I've used pretty much the same colours that are in the clouds, the pinks and the yellows, just to warm things up without making it too bright and vivid. And while we're on the subject of too bright and vivid, here's the colours that I've used, you can see, to create those lovely autumny golds and russets and yellows that are so indicative of a fall scene. Let's have a look at the colours we actually used in this picture. You've got cadmium red, cadmium yellow, phthalo blue, yellow ochre, raw umber, and a little lemon yellow just here and there. We could have made this sort of orange from the cad red and yellow, but it would have been far too bright. What in fact we used, if we get rid of those base colours, were these colours on the top line. And you can see how dull and muted and frankly fairly boring they are. And yet, used in the context of an autumn scene, they're absolutely right. So the trick with an autumn scene with all those vibrant reds and oranges is to play it down. Keep the colours muted. I promise you, and you can see for yourself, that even dull muted colours in the right context can produce a very vibrant and a very atmospheric picture. Right, but no series of pictures of a landscape would ever be complete unless we had a winter scene. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to use the same image, the same scene, but this time we're going to cover it with snow. Right, now I've just started the process a little bit by blocking in what amounts to almost a tonal sketch on the canvas. I've just used a couple of washes of phthalo blue, very, very pale, watery washes for the background trees, and a little bit darker to highlight the church and the nearer trees. Just outline where the pathway would be and where the lake would be. I haven't bothered with the tree yet, I'll paint that in later. So let's get on and put some colour into that. Right, we filled in the background trees. phthalo blue and white, a tiny touch of raw umber, same colours, rather more raw umber, a little bit more phthalo blue just to make things a bit stronger. But you can see already it gives us two nice layers of trees. I'm going to paint the church now, which I'm going to use raw umber for and white. Now I'm also going to throw in a little bit of permanent rose here. We'll just do the front of the church like that. Now we can do one or two things here. I can either make that very, very light, like that, which still doesn't, in my view, show up enough against the background sky. So what I'm going to do is to darken it off slightly. A little bit of raw umber. And this is a little dodge you can use when you get colours side by side that you want a little bit of contrast and counter change, but you know that you're going to have a dark area next to it. You don't want it dark all the way across because it won't show up this side then. Now, having taken most of the paint off, it's an easy matter to blend that colour in like that. Suddenly you've got the dark edge against the lighter sky, but it's very quickly fading off to the lighter edge where we're going to have the shadow side of the church. So that's a very useful little dodge that you'll use over and over again to give you the light and the dark when they're next to each other. Right, I've filled in the church now, not forgetting to put some snow on top of the roof and just on the top edges of the church, and a little hint on the lower part of the opening in the steeple. Always a little difficult because it's so easy to start getting into too much detail, and we're really just trying to create an atmosphere. But what I've done also is just to put a little smudge. It's almost what was left on the paintbrush when I did the roof, a little smudge of white as we're starting to come forward, just a little hint that you can actually start to see snow. What I'm going to do now is to use some titanium white to start painting in some of the snow, but at the moment that to me doesn't read right because it is white. So to make this authentic and to pick out this little hint of red in the sky, what I'm going to do is just pick up a little bit of that permanent rose. That's far too strong at the moment. A little bit of that, it's a case of, have a look at that phthalo blue. Now there's a little purple, that's nice. That's just something akin to the, maybe a little more red. There we go. And what I'm doing, you can see now, that's better. That's better. That's starting to look like the sort of colours that are in the sky. As we come forward, it's a little bit like water. I mean, snow is only water really, it's frozen. But as you get further forward here, it starts to get a little bit bluer. But that will give a nice warmth to that part of the snow, so we don't have that too straight an edge. Let's just soften that off with a few imaginary bushes that's starting to catch the snow a little bit here and there. Now then, we'll look at the lake in a second. I'll just do this forward area here, what would be a grassy area under the snow. So we'll do that with the same colours. Perhaps this time a little bit more yellow ochre. That's fine. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of phthalo blue because we want the hint of the pathway to be defined like that, as if it's just slightly catching a little bit of a snow shadow. This is a little bank on this side, and there's a little bank on the other side. Now, as to the lake, we're going to have this frozen, but not necessarily covered in snow, just a frozen lake. So here, I'm just going to drag the paint across. It's the same phthalo blue by and large with white that I've got here. I'm just dragging it across. I'm just going to use the hint of the sky reflection. Not too much. You don't want it striped, you don't want it like a Neapolitan ice cream, but at the same time you do want it to pick up all those gorgeous colours in the sky. Here in these trees we've got the branches and they're covered by the clusters of leaves. Here we're going to replicate the winter tree, so there's going to be rather more of this background showing. So let's just put that in. Let's send it back into its rightful place. It's white and it's pale blue and it's cool, so that's going to take it back, unlike these warm colours that are going to come forward. We're going to start off with the raw umber, phthalo blue again. That gives us that nice colour there, a little bit of the white. We'll keep this quite wet with a little bit of water. So we'll start this and we'll take that. Yeah, we'll have a thickish tree here. Doesn't have to be the same as these trees. Okay, that's as far as we want to go with that brush. Let's come back to the rigger. And I'm going to do this exactly the same as I did with the generic tree when we looked at the first lesson with the winter trees. Okay, we're almost there now. You can see that I've tried that little dodge that I showed you of putting some different coloured branches in as if it was catching the sun's rays. Okay, as ever, we can go on forever more, but I think you get the idea. I'm going to leave this as this. I'm not going to put any sponging on this particular tree because I think it might be a little bit heavy and give too much weight to this side of the picture, particularly as I've got to put a little hint of sort of reflection on the frozen ice. But just let's tie up one or two loose ends now. I'll just clean the brush, just go back into the white paint, just because we've had snow, then we'll have a little bit of snow. It's a heavy snowfall, so you will have snow sitting on top of the branches. It's just gives that nice impression of snow that's hanging onto branches that hasn't yet been shaken off, and almost like little series of dazzling highlights. Now what I'm going to use is the 1/2 inch brush or flat brush, and I'm just going to give ourselves a hint of a diffused shadow, as if it's reflecting across the slightly frozen surface, but not so much that it was in water. Before we do that, we'll just define the underneath part of the lake, which is what you'd guess where it's below the snow, and there's still the sort of dirty riverbank there that's just, it's not got any snow on it. The snow is actually overhanging. There's a little bit of riverbank here. We'll cover that with snow in a moment or two and you'll see exactly what I'm aiming to do. But here, the line of the tree is dropping down like that, and it splits somewhere there, doesn't it? And it sort of angles towards that way like that, and that sort of angles that way like that. You needn't worry about getting every single little nuance of branch in. It's just this big branch here that's come out at the base. I'm just letting that dry in slightly, taking the paint off now. I'm just going to diffuse that ever so slightly, and then just to finish off, because I think we're pretty well there now, I'm just going to take some pure white paint. It's probably got a little bit of blue mixed in it, but it doesn't matter. And these are going to be for the final highlights. The first thing I'm going to do is just drag some on top over the riverbank there, as if they're just catching a riverbank like that. That's fine. Again, even though there might be snow on top of the ice there, a few flecks of snow, it's still painted horizontally to make sure that we don't we'll keep the water flat. Okay, I'm just finishing off now, just a few little reflections really. And remember, this is diffused, so I'm going to wipe that with my finger. Just make sure it's not too sharp. Those shadows there are too sharply defined, so we'll just amend those. But you can see I've put the fence posts on, just stabbed on with the 1/2 inch flat brush, and then really, while it's still wet, a little bit of pale blue paint just on top, just to give that nice effect. And I'm starting to fiddle now, because I'm putting turquoise blue on the side of the church just to give a little hint of texture and what have you. But I'm going to leave it at that, because you can see now that what we've done, set out to do, is to create this lovely atmospheric, Christmassy, wintry scene. Well, there we are. We got 4 pictures of the same scene at 4 different times of the year. I've really enjoyed doing this, and I hope you'll find this as a little exercise. It'll be something that you can try yourself and will be very, very useful. You obviously don't have to do it on the same board as I've done. I've only done that so you can compare all the pictures side by side. But nevertheless, you can see it's only about 8 by 6 each actual picture, and you've got yourself a nice little cameo scene. So there we are: spring, summer, autumn and winter. 4 quite different pictures, but all of them creating the essential mood and atmosphere that you need in any landscape painting. Right, I hope you can see now, by using very simple shapes, that you can create any sort of tree that you want. And remember, just like mountains and hills, the further away the tree is into the picture, the more convincing it will look if you use pale blues and greys. When you're coming closer in to close-up trees, then having put that dark background, keep the 3-dimensional effect that you're starting to create by making sure that you don't cover the dark background with too much light coloured paint. Right, what's next? Water. We'll be looking at puddles, we'll be looking at rippling streams, we'll be looking at things like crashing waves running up on the beach and rolling over the rocks. So when you're ready, put the water DVD in the player, press play, and I'll show you how easy it is to produce convincing wet looking water.